I'd like to share with you some of what has been discovered regarding the Gospels so that we can understand how to approach the Gospels and how to understand why the Gospels retain both sayings of Jesus which would indicate his limitations and also sayings which would indicate that he is somehow divine. Let me then go to my slides. As the Gospels now appear in the Bible, this is the order, starting from your left to right, Matthew first, Mark, Luke, and then John. However, scholars generally today believe that Mark was the first of the four Gospels to be written. And hence, this would be roughly the order: Mark first, Matthew and Luke somewhere in between, and finally John. One of the scholars who has contributed to this conclusion, or rather has accepted the conclusion, and is undoubtedly a conservative scholar. Let me check with James. Is Richard Balcom a conservative scholar? Somewhere there. Is F.F. Bruce a conservative scholar? Oh, by the way, since he is a conservative scholar, I'd like to present to you New Testament history by F.F. Bruce.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
One of my textbooks.
Now, both Richard Balcom and F.F. Bruce hold to the idea that Mark was first and John last. Now, this is a very important conclusion, and we'll see where it heads. The dating I've given here for Mark's Gospel is 65 to 75, and that corresponds to the specific dating that has been given by Richard Balcom. Well, I said specific, but obviously it is a range because there is a certain amount of subjectivity involved in trying to determine the precise dates. According to F.F. Bruce, a few years earlier than this, because he said the middle of the middle 60s, and so it could be somewhere in close to that, but not to the 75 number. John's Gospel in the last decade of the first century, so anywhere from 90 to 100, and this seems to be what F.F. Bruce says repeatedly, that John wrote towards the close of the first century. Now, what else do these scholars tell us? So Matthew and Luke are somewhere in between, but it is important to notice also that the scholars believe that Mark was a source used by Matthew and Luke in the composition of their own Gospels. Now, that's natural. If somebody has written a Gospel, you're going to write another one. Why start from scratch? You use the existing document, and you write it according to the way you know the facts to be, or to bring out the message you would like to bring out. So Matthew and Luke did this. But, as noted by F.F. Bruce, Matthew and Luke sometimes made improvements to Mark's Gospel. Now, he didn't spell out what all of the improvements are, but the improvements are, I believe, very important, and we should take cognizance of what they are. Finally, there are improvements to cover the human limitations of Jesus. For example, in Mark's Gospel, chapter 11, verses 12 to 14, Jesus approached a fig tree thinking that he would find fruit on it, but when he did not find any fruit on it, he cursed the fig tree. Why didn't he find any fruit on it? Mark is very clear. Because it was not the season for figs. But then in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 21, verse 18, the situation is changed. Jesus is hungry. He sees the fig tree. He went to it. He found nothing to it but leaves. And he said to it, "May no fruit ever come from you again." The difference is that Matthew here has removed the mention that it was not the season for figs. This allows Christians to meditate on Matthew's statement and make that into a parable about good and bad and what happens to those who do not fulfill their functions. They get destroyed, just like this fig tree, because they do not do what they're supposed to do. But as Mark's Gospel makes it plain, the reason there were no figs is because it was not the season for figs, and therefore it appears that Jesus here has made a mistake, and which is natural for a human being. Muslims would not have any difficulty accepting that such an error could occur.
And by the way, the fig tree issue
why was Jesus talking about the fig tree? And why are Muslims so fascinated with the fig tree issue? This has come up over and over again. Folks, the fig tree represents Israel. Jesus is going into Jerusalem. He is about to have all the encounters with the Jewish leaders. He's saying that Israel looks like it has fruit. It's got all the outward trappings and the pretty buildings and the prayer shawls and everything else, but there is no fruit. There is no real life. That's what the whole fig tree parable is all about. It wasn't Jesus ignorant of what time figs were. He grew up in that area. Do you really think? I mean, it would almost be like someone in Toronto saying, well, it's always snowing in March. Well, it's not now, is it? You know when it's supposed to be snowing here. He knew when the fig... And it's not right now. It's hot in here. You got some fans or something? I'm from Arizona and it's hot in here. I mean, really. Jesus knew when the season of figs was. He was making a point about the people of Israel. They weren't walking after God. This is clearly what is there.
What about the fig tree episode? James did precisely what I said that Christians do. They go to Matthew's recollection of the event, and then they make that into a parable, into a story, into a lesson. And then he made a lot of fun about it. I enjoyed that. James, you're very funny about the weather and Jesus knowing about the seasons. But Mark is very precise. The reason the tree had no fruit is because it was not the season for figs. Jesus went up thinking that he will find fruit, but then he did not find fruit because it was not the season for figs. In Mark's narrative, it is very clear that Jesus was mistaken, and then Matthew tried to correct that to remove this clear conclusion that Jesus was mistaken.